Well, welcome everybody. My name's Jonathan. If you haven't met me yet, I'm the chief of staff here at Balboa. I'm here with Keith Wagner. He's our chief technology officer. And so today, yeah, we're kind of covering this topic of the center of excellence. Why do you want one? What do you do with it? How do you stand it up? Who needs to be in it? All the important considerations there. So it's good to have you guys today. Keith, do you want to click us forward real quick?
Yeah.
So if you haven't met Balboa before, we're pretty cool. At least I think so. So we're a product analytics consulting agency. We primarily work with Pendo. And the main thing that we do is we help our clients establish a better relationship with their customers. And so, we firmly believe that doing that is the best way to grow your business. This is the best way to improve your revenue retention, best way to improve your product engagement. And so that's kind of what we're all about here. And so we like to do these events because, we see a lot of things out in the market working with our clients, and we try to share them with the community whenever that we can. So, thankfully for you guys, I am not your main speaker right now. Today, Keith is going to be the one delivering the presentation. So I'll turn it over to him in a second here. But we want this to be an interactive event, like always. So if you ever have any questions that you want answered during Keith's presentation, just drop it into the chat. I'll be watching the chat and I'll make sure I bring those up with Keith. And then later on in the event, when the presentation's over, we're going to do live Q&A. So you can come off mic and ask questions live if you'd like then. So cool. All right, Keith, I'm gonna let you take it over here.
Perfect. I'm going to give a quick introduction of myself. We gave one of Balboa. I am one of the co-founders and CTO of Balboa. And I've been working with product operations, like in product operations for about 10 years. And my story is I started out of college, got a job as a product manager, had a dev team, worked in a certain product in the company that I was with, and found a need at that company. They did not have a product operations department. And I found a lot of tools that we had that needed a lot of love. And so I jumped in and eventually started up a product ops department in that organization. And the rest is history from there, just kept working in product ops since then. And my thing I always say in all of these presentations is I built my career around connecting human insights to business success. What I'd like to do is find what users are thinking, what they're doing, and how that relates to the goals that are happening with organizations. Now, this presentation is going to be pretty short. We're going to have a big Q&A section. I just wanted to sort of set the stage, and it's building off of the presentation that I gave at Pandemonium. I don't know if anybody here was able to see that presentation. So there's a few similar elements from that presentation, but it's building off of that. And it's specifically around a center of excellence. Now, a center of excellence is defined as a team that establishes and promotes best practices, processes, and resources around a specific domain or tool. So it's individual people who are given responsibility over something. And that could be a tool, a product. A lot of times people have one over Salesforce. We do ones with Pendo, where you create a team that understands how the organization wants to use that product and how it relates to the goals that the organization is trying to accomplish. Now, I did not put this in my Pandemonium uh, presentation, but it's important to understand the why of why you would want to do this. So a lot of organizations have various different tools, and not all of them are created with a center of excellence team. So I want to help everybody understand why you'd want to do this for your organization and for the tools that you have. And the first one is to maximize ROI on tools. It prevents decay from poor configuration setup. The problem with tools is that when you create them really clean at the beginning. But if they do not have the maintenance moving forward with that, then a lot of times it can decay and people stop using it. People start to distrust it. Another one is exactly that, the securing the data trust. Active management keeps users confident in the metrics. I'm sure everybody here has some tool that they use that they specifically try not to use because they don't trust the data, because it's different from what they expect. And that is where a center of excellence comes in. It makes sure that the data that's coming into the system, that's being tracked by the system, is exactly what you expect. Next one would be turning individual knowledge into institutional knowledge. How many people here had a time where there was a tool or a process that when somebody left the company, that process or tool died. That is, this is where a center of excellence would come in. Yeah, I see Jonathan raising her hand. It happened to me so many times where we eventually got a completely new tool because the person who was managing that uh, left, and that knowledge went with them. A center of excellence is not just about assigning responsibility to a person, but it's assigning processes to help understand what happens when something like that, like a person leaves who is the lead over a tool. And then directly driving revenue and customer retention. This is a big one. When you have tools that you are utilizing, in this case for product analytics, you don't want to spend your time cleaning up that data. You want to spend your time using the data. And this is a huge, huge part of a center of excellence. It returns the focus of everyone to actually using the tool for the reason it was purchased, the reason it was set up, the reason you went through all the enablement sessions. And the important part of this is the data is telling you what is happening, but that human insight, the cleaning up, everything, all of that is telling you why it's happening. And so you need that human touch in these tools, in these processes to make sure that this is fully understood. Now, I have an analogy that I wanted to bring up that I brought up at Pandemonium. And it went over really well, so I wanted to reuse it here. And the analogy is imagine you have an organization or a group of people who have a house, and they really like this house. They have their nice tree outside, nice two-story house, but they feel like something's missing, and so they decide to add some ivy to the house. Well, works really well. It does exactly what they expected. The house looks a lot better now. But soon the ivy starts to spread to a place that the organization or the group of people did not want it to. And so they start to worry. And so what they do is they create signs and they say, okay, I don't want this around the window. Let's put up some signs, say no ivy on the windows. And then another part of the organization's like, oh, okay, you know what? We really can't have it on the roof. We can't have it on the chimney. We can't have it covering anything up there. Okay. Well, also, we really can't have it by the door because we need to be able to get inside the door. So let's put up a sign by the door saying no ivy by the door. And then another part of the organization is extremely worried because they love their tree. They don't want any ivy by the tree. So they put up multiple signs saying we cannot, absolutely cannot have ivy by the tree. And so they wash their hands, are great. They say, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. We have this great ivy, and we set up these signs. Everything is going perfectly fine." And soon, the ivy decides to cover the windows, and then after that, it soon covers the roof. And the person who was really worried about the door is like, "Okay, I realized what happened. This is a problem. We can fix this though. Nothing's happening to the tree because they had more signs. So all I need to do is add another sign." And then they walk away. And very soon, the ivy covers the door. And very soon after that, starts to creep towards the tree. This is the problem with organizations and the tools that you have. You have documentation on these tools, but the documentation is not the thing that's keeping, in this case, the ivy back or where you want it to be. The processes are not the things that fix your problems. It is the people. And what these people needed in this organization is not more signs, not more documentation, not more standard procedures. What they needed was a gardener, somebody who knew how the process, how the ivy worked, how to place it, how to water, how to do everything associated with what they were wanting to do and have that person responsible for that. The people are the ones who follow those processes. And it's important to create those. It's important to create standards. It's important to create those expectations. But without somebody to lead the charge on actually following those expectations, it won't get done because the tool itself isn't going to follow the documentation. It has to be the people that are following the documentation. So the big idea, I always like to do presentations and I like to have one big idea. There's a lot that you can take from this presentation, but in this case, if you go away with only one thing, this is it. Ownership, ownership, ownership. Tools without ownership are destined to fail. You need to make sure that somebody has that responsibility, that somebody feels like they own that tool. If something goes wrong, such as our example with the ivy spreading around the house, some people will just think, oh, it must be somebody else's responsibility. That other person will take care of it. If nobody feels like they have that main ownership of the tools that you're using for product analytics, then things will go wrong and they are destined to fail. But it's not just, oh, go ahead. Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, yeah. When you're talking about ownership here, what I'm thinking about is I hear this and I think, oh, this is like a dedicated person. Like this is one person, their entire job is to run the product analytics COE. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something different?
Yeah, so it's actually a bit of both. So a center of excellence is a team, and you need to have multiple people, especially for really big tools. I mean, imagine Salesforce for a large organization and telling a single person, yeah, you're the owner of this. It's not exactly what is being asked here. The team is responsible for different parts of that, but the recommendation is that there is one person who is the center of excellence leader, the center of excellence admin. Pendo is one that we use a lot, and I call that person the Pendo admin, like the main Pendo admin. And that's the person who is the main responsible party. Because if you just have a team of people, like 10 people, and you don't define who the leader is, who's going to be the one who schedules those meetings? Who's going to be the one that brings everybody together when there's a problem? Who's going to be the one to make sure that an audit happens? That needs to be fully defined. And so having a top level person as head of the COE, and they can have other responsibilities as well, is extremely important. That answer your question, Jonathan?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, and anybody else, feel free to ask questions in the chat. I don't have the chat up myself. I'll have to get it up on this other screen. But Jonathan will take a look at that and we
I'm
can
watching it.
answer those as well. Well, people are extremely important and they can help define those processes. They can help make sure that everything is going smoothly. But there is a really big part of this to where the gardener in our scenario might fully understand how to get everything back to, where it was before or back to the original expectation. But those owners don't always have a future looking view on what's happening with the organization. And so the gardener might know exactly where to put things to where you originally intended them, but they might not know, oh, we're going to be building onto this house or we're going to be planting another tree. That is where you need an org level center of excellence, which is something I like to call a governance guild. And I'm going to give it just a quick explanation. This would be like the escalation path that people have for these tools. So you'll have like an org level governance guild, which would be the head of the COE for the org level. You might have a technical lead, you'll have others on the team, and then a product or application or tool level center of excellence. Now, it's important to note that these center of excellence teams are going to be associated with a specific tool, application, domain, something that needs that management. And so this is not necessarily a single center of excellence team. This would be multiple product level center of excellence teams. So you might have one, like we said, for Pendo, Salesforce, Gainsight, maybe one for your product as a whole, maybe something for the dev team, depending on how your dev team works on uploading and trains and all the things that they have to work with. Those center of excellence teams are responsible for their domain and making sure that everything moves smoothly. Now, at the org level defines governance. And this is where we're going back to that analogy where the gardener might know how to handle the day to day with that tool or application, but they might not know the future looking. And so that's where the org level would define governance and send it down to the product or tool level center of excellence teams. And then the center of excellence teams at the product level would send the escalations up to the org level. Now, the org level governance guild would be a singular team, but the product level teams is multiple, as many as you can. And you might have the same people on multiple teams, but making sure that you have somebody responsible for each tool is crucial. And then a lead governance guild to make sure that everything like people leaving or org level processes are followed.
Do you think you could give us like a concrete example of governance here? I know like governance is something that everyone kind of understands, but like if you were to take it down to like the nitty-gritty Pindo level, for instance, what would be an example of governance that the governance guild is kind of setting up for everyone else?
Yeah. So I have a slide later on that talks what I call the core three of the COE. It's like the three main things that you do. And one of those things is the documentation on processes. Pendo as a really great example, setting naming conventions for tags. I think most people here probably have used Pendo before. It's a way to tag features and pages in your product to get product level analytics. And understanding how you name those is extremely important because if everybody names things differently, then when you go to look at the data, you're not going to understand what somebody was trying to say when they tagged a certain button. If they call it the submit button, but don't indicate where it was, well, which submit button is it? We have 7 in the application. Setting those kind of processes extremely important. Other things like users and security, who has admin access, who doesn't have admin access, who can create reports, who can share reports, all those kind of things.
We actually just got a question from Vikas. So Vikas is asking, why not just enable the gardener to know what the actual vision is, and then you can just build a separate organization level COE. What do you think about that, Keith?
Yeah, that is what this slide is alluding to. Is you have a org level COE, and I like to call that the governance guild. It's because it's governing the all the center of excellences. What I should have done here as a visual representation is put a multiple product level center of excellence on the side here to show that it's a branching out. You have the governance guild that understands that strategy, and as things change, they disseminate it out to all of the organizations. And that's how you let them know what the vision is. It's not just about the governance guild sending down governance, but also what's coming up. How do we want to use this? What's goals for the next year? And how can we utilize those tools to accomplish those goals as well? Yeah, good point, Vikas. Yeah. So a big part of this is when you have people and you have all these tools that they have to manage. And if you only had 5, as we see here, it's not too bad. I've been in many organizations where I'm assuming everybody here, you probably have 20 that you can think of right off the top of your head that you have to use sometimes on a daily basis. And it becomes difficult for people to understand when to use certain tools. There's a lot of times where there's similar data, and I use these ones as purposefully. In Snowflake, Gainsight, Pendo might have really similar data. Where you go to access that is sometimes confusing. What is the source of truth? Where do I go? How do I access what I need to access? And a lot of times, what I have seen is users, when they don't know where to go, they give up. They just decide to go do it on their own. And so they might have this amazing connection to Pendo to get usage data, but they don't use it because they're not sure how. Adding a center of excellence and a main responsible party for these organizational tools allows the user to not connect with just a tool, but to connect with people. And that is so much better for our human minds to know that we can just Slack somebody and ask them the question. Having that lifeline to somebody is extremely useful. And I see there's another question I think that came up. I don't know, Jonathan, if you had another one as well, but this is the big part of this is that
Yeah.
people are a huge part of how we work and how we think, and making sure that they're tied to tools is extremely important.
So the question is from Chris, and so he's actually talking about something that he does in his role, which is he'll use the Pendo MCP and to he'll use the MCP to audit everything in Pendo against like naming conventions that he's set up. So
Mhm.
for instance, I think Chris, what you're talking about here is if people have reports but there's no description on the report. Like that's a big pet peeve for you. But you use the MCP to identify all the reports that don't have a description, and then I assume you also use it to get the description on there. Is that correct, Chris?
That's correct. Just because, like, if you've had a long-standing center of excellence, like you go in and you could have 200 reports in there with no descriptions and be like, what does this even do? Why was this created? So, I
Yeah.
mean, hopefully they named it something that makes sense, but a description makes it really easy to see what it's for and then makes those reports reusable for other people, as long as they're
Yeah.
public, of course.
That is great. When we do audits in Pendo, we do the same thing. We do percent of reports, percent of features without a description, just as one of those metrics, because that's a huge part of this. And actually, AI is a big part of how center of excellence teams can be successful. is center of excellence teams have a responsibility to keep the data clean, to make sure that everybody's enabled to use that data. And that's a big job. And if you had to do it all manually, it would take a long time. AI enables these teams to do things quickly and to catch when there's problems even quicker. And because that's the biggest thing that these teams make sure that their teams have is trust in the data. They can make sure that, oh, everything's getting a little unruly because people are saying, hey, we don't have access to this, or I don't understand what this is. You're able to catch that before even people ask about it. That's a great point, Chris.
You can also use it to set up like a project within Claude that automatically notifies you the second somebody does it wrong. So that it's easy
Yes.
to fix and you can correct the bad behavior immediately.
Yeah, yeah, we should do one of these in the future, where we just give like a full training on how to create some of those or use the MCP server, especially for Pendo. Pendo is a really good tool, and that's a relatively new feature to be able to do that, because there's only so much you can do with like integration keys and such. So I love that idea. Okay, so moving on to Pendo MCP Masterclass. I like that. Yeah. The core three of the COE. This are the three things that a center of excellence should make sure that whatever tool you are working with that you do these three things. And the first one is governance. And that is the responsibilities relating to everything around the product. And we've been using Pendo in this example, so I can use that. Responsibilities around one, a main person over the whole of the product. Another person might be over guides. Pendo can send in-app messages. And the ability to do that is a really powerful tool, but it could also be messed up really easily. Having a team that is responsible for creating templates, creating color schemes and themes, making sure that the wording on guides are correct. That responsibility, if somebody understands or a team understands that they have that responsibility and they have that ownership, then that is what makes it successful. With Pendo, also, just like you said, Chris, auditing. That's a huge one with Pendo, making sure that your data is clean on a regular basis, setting what that regular basis is. Do you do an audit once a year or once a month? We recommend not once a year, probably more like at least once a quarter, but being able to do that, run that. Who does that? The governance is extremely important, and specifically defining those responsibilities, not just saying, Talina, you own Pendo, is saying this is the specific things that you are responsible for in Pendo. The second thing is standard operating procedures. These are the documented processes, best practices. Pendo, as the example, naming conventions is a big part of that. Documenting what those are, and then also making that documentation accessible to everyone. I highly recommend that for every tool that you have a center of excellence team for, creating training for new users, because new users are probably the biggest thing that kills the usage of tools. Because if somebody comes in and they weren't there during implementation and they didn't get all the amazing training that was given to you for free by the organization that you bought this from, a lot of times they're not as excited to use it. And there's nobody out there to just tell them, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. And so utilizing training materials for new users is a big part of this. And then the last one is requests. This is another very, very big one. It's not just important to have a team. That team needs to be accessible by regular users. Most users are not going to be on the center of excellence team, but they want to connect with that team. Having somebody who you can connect with in a Slack message is one of the biggest things that I've seen make tools successful. When somebody has a question, they will normally try to go to AI, and if AI can't answer it, a lot of times if they don't have somebody to go to, they'll just give up on it and they'll find something else. And they'll be like, "Oh, I'll try to do this instead, or I'll use this instead." And I have been in so many organizations where I got in to help run product ops, and I found that there were three tools that did the same thing that were bought by different teams, either because they didn't know that that other tool existed, or the tool was too unruly, and so they decided to get approval to buy something else. That is the reason for that is because people did not feel like they had that lifeline to understand where to go next when they needed help. And it's not just when they need help, but when they have requests for change. Like for Pendo, for example, you might need requests around changing some code to make something work properly. Things like that. Who do you go to? And making that as a part of the standard operating procedures and then making a request system is a huge part of this.
Keith,
Yeah.
specifically on the request part, so, I know we talk a lot about, context switching and like we need more time for deep work. And, as you've said, a lot of people in the Pinto COE, like it's not their entire job. They have their other job as well. And so what's the best way to do that? Where is it like you have dedicated office hours, or you're like, yeah, between hours of X and Y every day, like you can reach me and I'll respond within 2 minutes? Like, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, the first thing is people are going to have problems at all times of the day. And so, first of all, setting up a request system like in Jira, like a ticketing system, that's a big one. People being able to, when they need help, be able to find that help. And a lot of people use apps in Slack where somebody can ask a question to like a Slack bot, and then it will route the request to the correct person, making sure that the Center of Excellence team is part of that routing process. And it's pretty easy to set up those Slack bots and to say, if somebody asks about Gainsight, send it to this person. Just making sure that is step one with the requests. The other part, Jonathan, no, great. It's a great point with the office hours, especially when a team is new to a tool. Either you just bought it or you're revamping that tool. Having weekly or bi-weekly office hours super useful. And then the third thing I would say is, if possible, and this is not always possible, especially with big teams, just always being on call, just telling everybody, oh, this is the Salesforce person, this is the Gainsight person, this is the Pendo person. Just when people understand that, then they'll just send a direct message and be like, hey, I need help, please. And that person might not be able to help them in a moment, but they can at least route them to the right place or the right person who can. So those three things I think are extremely important. A ticketing system, office hours, and then direct messages if possible. I want to pause for any other questions because we're just about at the end of the presentation here.
We got another one from Vikas here. Where should the Pendo COE sit? Should it be in the business systems and or IT team, or should it be in the product team or the CX team, or where does it go?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I would say if you the Center of Excellence team should be made up of people who actually use the tool. If possible, putting it in the department that they are, with the head either being in that same department. If you have a big enough product ops team, it is really amazing if you can have all of the leads of the Center of Excellence teams in a product operations team. But I know not all organizations have a robust product ops team, but I would say it should live in the team that they are part of, like the tool. And so there might be a Center of Excellence that is made up of everybody or a bunch of people in support because of a tool that they use, or in development, or in product, or in CX ops. That is where the recommendation is, but every team is different. And there's a lot of times where there's a lot of cross functional work where somebody who's in product might be the lead for a bunch of support and CX ops tools, just because that's how the team works. And that's fine as well.
Keith, what about the governance guild specifically on that topic? Is that
Yeah.
supposed to be like more cross-functional?
Yes, because that is a singular team. It is not something that is per department. It is a head team that is over all of the Center of Excellences. That is up at like a management level. That is not something that is a daily work in the tools. This is something to where, as goals change, as the leadership part of the organization notices that there's problems with certain tools, they can go down to those teams and say, let's work this out together. And they also should be doing at least quarterly meetings where they can meet and say, how is everything going? Are we utilizing everything the way that we should be? We bought this tool to be able to do this thing 6 months ago. How are we tracking towards that goal? That's where that governance guild would live, is at that higher level. Normally, and I tell people it's normally at like a director level or above is what is normally what comprises the governance guild. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the final slide, which is just back to the big idea. I like to start with the big idea, end with the big idea, The big idea in this one is ownership, ownership, ownership. Tools without ownership are destined to fail. If you can think of all the tools that you use in the organization and you cannot tie a team or a person to the ownership of that tool, then you need to look into that. And it is a very, very important to make sure. And it might be fine right now. The tool might be working exactly how you intend it to work right now. But I guarantee things creep in slowly over time. Either the data gets a little unclean with how it was set up, and it just slowly starts to lose trust. And so I would recommend looking at all the tools you have and making sure that there is an owner for that. Well, that is the end of the presentation. We're on to the Q&A section. I'm going to be ending the presentation and hand it over to Jonathan to ask those questions, or we can take any questions you have.
Hey Keith, I got a question.
Yeah.
So I really love the governance guild solution. We're working on that here at our company. What are you finding out there when you're working with clients? Is this something that is newly adopted across those ecosystems and those companies, or is this something they embrace, or is this a challenge for them to say, I'm not skilled at Penda, why would I lead the governance guild?
Yeah. And the governance guild is definitely a team at higher levels. And a lot of times they're comprised of people who might not necessarily use all of the tools that are in the organization, but they do know strategy and they do know why things were purchased. And that is how I frame this when creating a governance guild with an organization is you know what you want to happen in your organization and you have these tools to make that happen. And so the governance guild is less about making sure the tools are all shiny and nice. I used this example pretty recently to where imagine you have like a carpenter company. The center of excellence is making sure that the hammer is useful. It doesn't have any chips in it. It's all nice and shiny and works fine. The governance guild is the toolbox, making sure everything's organized and that everybody can find things and that it all matches to what the organization needs and that all the tools are there. So I would say it is I think it's mostly readily adopted. I've actually gotten more pushback on creating center of excellence teams than I have governance guilds. Because governance guilds are normally at that leadership level and they love to talk strategy and they love to make sure things are working. When you create a center of excellence, the pushback normally comes from the fact that you rarely create this as a standalone role, right? These are always given to people who have other roles in the organization. So asking people to do more is always something that can be a difficult conversation to have.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bruce, I'm gonna pick on you if you don't mind. Partly because you kind of offered up some stuff. So it looks like you're working on a COE for Airtable at WM. I assume that's Walmart. Um, so I'm curious, like, when you're kind of looking at this presentation we're doing right now, what about this resonates with you? Like, what is similar to what you guys are doing? What's different? Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think the core themes kind of really align with what we were looking at in terms of creating the center of excellence, and also in terms of conversations that we've had around like what should the team look like, especially with an org as large as Walmart, just trying to understand who the champions would be and who we should engage. So I mean, part of the challenge is getting the right stakeholders in the same area, but also getting commitment from them to join as well. So we're in the early stages. We've had preliminary conversations, but at this point we're just essentially building the framework of the COE.
Yeah. Now that actually leads me to a point that I've been asked a lot. When organizations start this, they normally don't have center of excellences and all their tools. And it seems really daunting to start that process. And so what I always recommend is when you're creating a center of excellence in a governance guild, start with a single tool and get that single tool, a center of excellence that is nice and clean and works really well, and then move on to the rest of the systems. That way you have a process for creating those. You know where the documentation is going to live. You know how the communication between the Governance Guild and the Center of Excellence team is going to work. All those things get defined. If you try to jump in and create champions for every single tool just immediately, it becomes really hard for the people creating those teams to manage.
Bruce, the other thing that you dropped in the chat, you dropped a question. You were saying, hold on, let me pull it up here. So when a COE governance model breaks down in practice, what's usually the root cause? Is it ownership, tooling, politics, or something else? Keith, what do you think about that question?
When a Center of Excellence fails, is what you said?
Yeah, the root cause.
Um, yeah, I would definitely say ownership and people. The tool is rarely the problem. In some cases, you get a tool with expectations, right? And then the tool doesn't actually meet those expectations. I think that's more rare than people dropping the ball, right? When you have somebody who loves a product or loves a tool, it gets used, it gets disseminated, it gets enabled across the organization because there's people who are using that. And something I notice is Pendo, for example, if you want people at an organization to use that, if you want to change the culture to have people use that, then use it yourself. If you tell people to use a tool, but don't show them the value, then people don't adopt it. And if you can take Pendo data, product data into meetings and say, oh, this is something really cool I found. It looks like most of our people are logging on from 9 o'clock in the morning to 12 o'clock. And then it just drops off like a cliff. Why is this happening? Oh, okay, maybe we should send the communications in that time period. Understanding those things like, oh, people just, it's like a light bulb moment. People are like, oh, I can do that. And then they start to utilize the tool themselves. And so it's usually just people using the product or people owning the product that is the reason why things would fail.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges we had within Walmart is the enablement piece. There are so many different platforms that are available to associates, and just knowing what's available and what may come and go, which is the case, at their scale. So one of the things
Yeah.
that we've really had to focus on is really creating, an enablement strategy around self-service, certifications and things like that for associates to take advantage of and to kind of spread the word on, how to leverage it, how to access it's available.
Yeah. Yeah. And the like AI is a really good tool for this because I'm assuming Bruce, like somebody like Walmart, like you said, they have so many tools. There is no way that you could train a new hire to understand everything that they have access to at a place like Walmart. There's just no way. And so having like a Claude or like a Slack bot or something to where somebody can go on and ask the question, I would really like to know how our users are utilizing blank feature, whatever it is. And having you as in this case, the governance guild would be the one that runs that training somehow, assigning it to somebody. That is amazing for people because you don't want tools to be hidden, but in Walmart you also can't just tell them about everything. They would get onboarded in a year, right? It would take them
Yep.
way too long. Waiting for any more questions. I know Talina, you probably have a lot of questions. Talina is one of our resident Pendo experts. Oh, actually, this is a big one. I have some notes of other questions that I know I've been asked before that I can use. So what happens when somebody leaves? That's like a big part of this, right? You have somebody who owns this, and a lot of times there's a natural center of excellence that gets created when somebody comes in and uses a tool. I mean, how many times in your career have you gone through an organization where you just knew this one person just loved this tool and made sure everybody was using this. That's like it was like a natural center of excellence. Nobody called it that. It just, yeah, Chris, you know somebody like that, or you probably were that person actually, Chris, to where that it just that's just how it worked. That's just the person who did those things. But when that person leaves, of course, it's a problem. Setting up the process of who takes over is important. But the big part of this is yes, there should be one leader of a center of excellence, but there should be at least two people on every center of excellence team that understands what each other does. Yes, there's a single lead, but if any one of those people leaves, the other person knows. And I would actually recommend the Center of Excellence team is greater than two. Like in Pendo, we have normally a Pendo champion or a Pendo admin, the guide approval lead and a guide approval team. You have one for technical enablement of Pendo. So you could have up to 4 or 5 people on a single Center of Excellence team, depending on what the tool is and what responsibilities are needed there. And don't be afraid to add people to that team. Pendo is a great example of this. You might not have like Pendo Listen, which is a feedback tool, but if you get that, don't rely on the current team to handle that new module. Have somebody else be the feedback center of excellence team or lead of the Pendo Center of Excellence in that case.
Yeah, that was a good point, Keith. One of the things that we discussed when we were initially going through strategies was, what is our minimal viable like size for our COE, and even within Walmart, um, we have roughly 7, but at that scale, it's a lot of different cross-functional teams that we have to work with. But that's where we're starting.
Yeah. Large, I think I've actually thought about this. There's pros and cons to both a large and small organizations. Because large organizations, you have the problem to where there's so many things or so many people, but you normally have the benefit of being able to hire somebody for a specific role or specific ownership of a tool. Whereas small teams might not have as many tools or as many people to train, but you rarely will see a startup hire somebody to just manage Gainsight, right? It's in a small organization, everybody wears all the hats. And so it becomes more difficult because you might have a single person that is the lead of 4 different tools center of excellences. And that causes other problems, right? There's a lot of times that I've noticed bandwidth issues with smaller organizations when you're trying to run those things. And so there's all those pros and cons, and just making sure that you watch and understand that it is extremely important to make sure that whoever is owning these things can own them. And if there's a bandwidth issue, it's worth the money to hire somebody else on to help out. Maybe not be that individual role for, let's say, the Gainsight admin or the Gainsight champion, but just hiring somebody else on who can do other things and be that lead.
Keith,
We
I'm
have,
curious as you think about tech leads. One of the things we're learning here at Edward Jones, highly matrixed organization, a lot of layers. We got a ton of our COE focus on the branch side or the internal applications side of the house. That's Salesforce and Snow and some of our internal tools, less on the client side. But what we've realized is we have not adopted a discipline around using internal front end and back end developers that can get into source code and
mhm,
correct bronze and silver attribute tagging that was built by, we don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but at some point, somebody didn't understand the gold level standard or gold label standards that should have been applied. We're thinking about segmenting and putting desktop in one bucket and then native mobile in another bucket, because native mobile, you can't scrape that, you can't get into a DOM tree. You're at the liberty of what was embedded in as the original source code for the Pendo tags. And so
mhm.
we're thinking, let those native mobile folks live on their own within that
Yeah.
tech lead center and let desktop, the data test ID version of technology excellence live on its own. Any thoughts around that strategy?
Yeah, I have actually done that one time. I would normally recommend having a single team over one platform. Let's say Pendo, for example. It makes it easier for users who are trying to understand the product. However, every organization is different, and you always have to be willing to pivot when needed. And I've done that exact same thing, Mike, to where the mobile applications were so different, and especially in Pendo, the tagging, all of those is so different that having the Pendo person be the main person over all the tools, mobile included, just didn't work. It did not work for those teams. And so having somebody over all mobile applications, not just iOS and Android as two individuals, but just as a whole, because they are similar, is very useful. I would probably only recommend that though, in a case where you have a lot of applications or products. If you have one web and one mobile, it's probably best to try to keep a singular team for all of those. If you have 5 web applications and 3 mobile applications, it gets to a point where it is a little unruly, right? And it makes sense to split it up.
Cool. Thanks for that feedback.
But another point you made though is the technical lead for all of that is an extremely important part. Sorry, I got turn off my phone, I guess. Um, That's an extremely important part because you have things like tagging and developers who are supposed to be naming things like track events in a certain way. Like, how are they supposed to know that? And a technical lead is that bridge between a development team and the center of excellence team. Because you have like the Pendo champion, the admin, who's over making sure tagging's done. And they're like the bridge between the product managers and the center of excellence team. The tech lead is the bridge between the developers and the tech team and the center of excellence team. The guide leader is between the marketing and the center of
Hmm.
excellence team, making sure that every part of your organization has a touch point to the leaders of the tool is extremely important. And that's actually especially when it comes to messages and things that talk to customers. Like I think Gainsight, for example, all the organizations having a way to have a say in what is being told to customers is a big deal. I saw that comment because Bob, the guy who knew everything and had the documentation in his head. If there's somebody who's really gung ho, it works for a little tiny bit, and then eventually that person either can't do it anymore, or they leave, and that's when it becomes a problem. So having that team take that out of Bob's head, put it in documentation, is huge.
Well, we got about 8 minutes left here. We usually try to end these just a little bit early, just to give you guys back a little bit of time. So I guess Keith, like, what would be the last like 30 seconds that you would want to leave everybody with here?
Yeah, the big idea, it, remember ownership. Look at your tools, look at wherever you're getting product analytics as a start. Who is owning that? Who makes sure that the data that's coming in is correct? Everything from Databricks to Gainsight, Pendo, Salesforce, all of those places. Who is confirming and doing the audits? If you don't know who that is, you might not have anybody. And that's where you start to think, should we create this team? Its ownership is so important. And if you don't have that, the tools are destined to fail. If you have somebody who's owning tools, you won't need to go through the process of ending life of a certain tool and starting up a new one. You'll be able to use what is useful and why you bought the tool in the first place in perpetuity and help your team every day rather than let it uh, decline in disuse and your employees not being able to use what they want to have. So extremely important to look into ownership and make sure that you have somebody, and that might be you. It might be somebody. It might be a gap that you see, and you can jump in and fill that gap.
Sweet. Well, everybody who's in here, thanks for joining us for what was probably your lunch hour here on Random Thursday. We appreciate all of you, and we do this because we try to make it valuable. So if it was or it wasn't, and you had strong feelings about it, just message me or Keith, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it. We do these once a month, so our next one is going to be in the back half of June. Topic still to be announced, but I'm pretty excited about it. And then on this one, we will, as always, we'll have the recording out. So that'll be on YouTube, and I'll send an email out to everybody who signed up for this event. So you'll get the recording in your inbox probably tomorrow morning. So, but yeah, I think that just about wraps it up. So thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Enjoy your day.
Thank you.